and doing various odd jobs. And at some point, I'd kind of just given up. After about 5 years, I gave up on the idea of teaching. And about 9 or 10 years after we got back, I came home from work one day, and my wife says, "Hey, somebody from SBU called, and they want you to teach a class."
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 96 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with the founder of Elderserve. Please welcome Jan Fekkes. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview folks around Camano Island and beyond. If you want to stay up to date on events, businesses, and even hear a little history of this area, subscribe to this podcast and share with your friends. Thanks for listening. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. On this episode, I got to speak with Jan Fekkes, who is a professor at a couple local colleges. Used to be at Trinity Lutheran, Lutheran. I'm probably getting that wrong now. Used to be at that before it was shut down. So he teaches some online classes now, but he also is the founder of Elderserve, which what Elderserve does is it helps people, elders, imagine that he has a bunch of experience in building, including like plumbing, electrical, all of those things. And everyone knows cost of living and stuff has gone up. And for those who can't, for people who have retired or who are older and maybe, cost of good has gone up way higher than they were expecting during retirement. He actually helps out those people at a lower rate and is able to help them out in some of these projects that they wouldn't necessarily get to, have someone that they could afford normally to do these. So he helps out a lot of people through that. He also is he has his doctorate. So I realized in the beginning of this episode, I don't call him Dr. Jan Fekkes, and throughout the episode, I don't either, because he's also the dad of Tobin Fekkes, and so I've always known him as Jan or Mr. Fekkes, and never thought and put two and two together that he's also a doctorate. And when he introduces himself, he usually introduces himself as Jan. So anyways, he's technically Dr. Jan Fekkes, but anyways, so he teaches a Sunday school at Camano Chapel, and right now he's doing one where he's going through the whole book of the Bible from Genesis to Revelations. So you can check those out. I've got links for those in the episode show notes. So but he also immigrated here to America when he was like 2.5, so really young, but his family and still that kind of shaped a little bit of his childhood. So you get to hear about that and how he got to where he is and why he started Elderserve and farther and all those things. So anyways, without further ado, here's my conversation with Jan Fekkes. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with the founder of Elderserve. Welcome to the podcast, Jan Fekkes.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Jan.
Well, Jan. I was born in the Netherlands in Rotterdam and came over when I was about 2.5 from Holland with my parents on a big steamship, or a big ship anyway, and came into New York, and we went to Indianapolis, where some of my dad's relatives were already working there and had established a business with landscaping and a nursery, which is still there today.
Okay.
And so I grew up there till I was about 8, and then we moved to Southern California, to the Valley area. And my dad was a landscaper and worked there, and I went to elementary school there, and then we ended up moving to Thousand Oaks, a little bit farther north in California. There was a lot of development at that time period, and my dad, as a landscaper, was looking for a lot more work. So
yeah.
So that's kind of basically where I grew up. Went to junior high, or went to high school there, Thousand Oaks High, and I had 5 brothers and sisters below me.
Okay.
And they all still live there around my dad. My mom passed away about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
And my dad, who's 91, who I just talked to last night, is doing well. And so he's got a lot of help with my brothers and sisters there.
Nice.
So
Very cool.
kind of my upbringing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I know you were really young when you came over, but how was that growing up? Was it like with your family and everything? Did it feel like there was a culture shock, or did it feel? Did you feel outcast or anything like that growing up?
No, I never did. I mean, having started that young, 2.5, I just grew up, basically in the culture. My mom says that I used to speak pretty fluent Dutch when I was a kid. She has tapes of me, but, I never read it. And so it didn't really sink in. So, and just going to school. I mean, the one thing I did do to kind of protect myself was to change my name, not officially, but Jan, Jan, is like a girl's name when you're growing up. So I changed it to John, kind of anglicized it, and didn't really grow out of that until I was like in my 20s. My wife still called me Johnny when we got married. And so it's been hard to get some people who have known me for a long time to switch to Jan. And my dad used to go by Jan. I'm the third, so
Okay.
my dad is a junior, and his dad was a Jan as well. So my dad would use Jan because people still mispronounce yawn. I kind of have to put my hand up to my face like I'm yawning and say that's how you pronounce it. So, but I like my given name.
Yeah. So back then, did you actually sign John like J-O?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I know this is skipping ahead a little bit, but you didn't continue the tradition of passing that name down. What was kind of the reasoning?
Yeah, I just wasn't a traditional kind of person. So I just thought it was strange to have our first child, his name is Derek, be, Jan the fourth. At some point, I mean, you don't see a lot of fourths anymore anyway. So, so I just thought, no, we'll kind of start fresh here. So, yeah, and we have 5 boys, so we had a lot of chances to try different names. So.
Very cool. So then growing up you grew up a little bit in Indianapolis and then mostly in California. What was that like growing up for you and everything?
Yeah, it was, it was a great upbringing there. I was never really into school much, elementary school or junior high or high school. I didn't really like school.
Okay.
And so I didn't really apply myself at that point in school. Like, I can't really honestly remember one teacher's name in either elementary or junior high or high school. I can remember one high school teacher's name, Mr. Martin, just because he happened to go to the church I went to.
Okay.
So I didn't do that well and didn't really start to apply myself in education until much later.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's kind of funny that you say that because I know more of your history as you get older and stuff. With school and stuff. So
yeah.
Nice. Okay, so you were living in Thousand Oaks then. Then is that where you've graduated high school there, right?
Yeah, I graduated high school, and I worked for about a year after high school, and then I went to a private Christian college in Fullerton, Pacific Christian College, for about a year, and then I left there and moved to Long Beach, California, to work with some friends of mine from the college.
Okay.
In an inner city church, Westside Christian Church in Long Beach, California.
Okay.
And ended up working there for about 10 years in a variety of capacities. I was worked with the youth, worked with young adults. I was choir director, music director, did a lot of different things. So
yeah.
And that was a very formative period for me, growing up in the inner city there, or working in the inner city.
Yeah. How so?
Well, just, Long Beach is called the International City, and so where we were, there had been a lot of, what you call white flight, a lot of the older generation from the church that grew up there, kind of moving out to the suburbs, and a lot of other ethnic groups moving in. And so the church, went through a bit of a culture shock, where we would have African-American women in the front row yelling, "Amen, amen," and all the older white people going, "Whoa, we've never had this before." But we made a good transition. The pastor was very open to and concerned to integrate the church, and you always have growing pains with that. But they eventually had a Filipino congregation that met there, and some other groups as well. So that was a good formative period for me as far as ministry is concerned.
Yeah. So going back just a little bit then, you said you had attended a college or a Christian college. What had kind of pushed you in that direction to start going down that path?
It's mainly peers, people I knew who were going there, and I just thought I would give it a try, and really. Mostly what I did there was music.
Okay.
I wasn't a music major, but I was very into music, playing piano and guitar. And a group of us started a group called Jubal, which is named after the person who invented musical instruments in Genesis chapter 4. And it was kind of almost like a Christian jazz band in a sense.
Okay.
We had an upright bass player and really, really good drummer and a singer, a woman singer. And we would go around to churches and different conferences and things, and we would play our music. We'd write our own music, or we'd do some covers of things. And that was kind of my main focus in school.
Okay.
Not academics. So
Nice. So then you were at Westside Christian Church. Then what kind of happened? Where'd you go from there, and why? What caused the transition?
Well, in my final years there teaching young adults, we were teaching Bible studies, and I kind of felt a calling to be a teacher, teach in a college setting, and so I went to Biola. I finished up my undergraduate in biblical studies there. My wife also had gone there before me she got an RN degree. So I kind of put her through. We got married, I think, her first year there.
Okay.
And I worked and put her through, and then she worked and put me through. And I finished my degree there in 1981.
Okay.
In biblical studies. So that was a big contrast to my earlier educational pursuits, where I got probably C's and D's in high school, just because I could care less. And then I graduated summa cum laude at Biola. So I had to learn Greek and biblical languages, and so from there, in order to get a teaching job, you would normally have to do a PhD. Mm-hmm. So I explored the idea of going to England and studying there, and so in England you can get a PhD without actually getting a master's.
Okay.
You start a master's program, but then after about a year they transfer you right into a PhD program. So
okay.
that's kind of a nice benefit. And when I was teaching at Westside Christian, I had gone through pretty much all the New Testament books, and I'd kind of stayed away from the book of Revelation. And then eventually I did teach it, and I ended up with a lot more questions than answers. So in thinking about what to study for my doctoral dissertation, I decided to do the book of Revelation. So I wrote to 3 different professors in England, Cambridge and Kent-on-Canterbury, and then Manchester University. And ended up going to Manchester and studying there. And I did my doctorate on the use of Isaiah in the book of Revelation. So it's something in the field that we call intertextuality.
Okay.
How does a New Testament writer use the Old Testament? Which, the Old Testament was the Bible of the early church. So,
right.
So that was a great time. We lived kind of out of the city and developed a lot of friendships, some of which we still keep up on and travel with friends from England occasionally. And we've been back 2 or 3 times. So
Nice.
yeah, I ended up getting my PhD there. I spent 4 years, 8 hours a day in the Book of Revelation.
So I want to jump into that for a minute. You put a lot of time in studying into that. Can you? I know this is a very deep. Obviously, you did your whole study on this, so you can go really deep on it. But for those of our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with the book or the way it's written and stuff, can you kind of give a description of that and why it's different than maybe other books of the Bible and stuff?
Well, it's different in 2 main ways. One, as a literary style, it's what we call an apocalyptic book, so kind of similar to Daniel in the Old Testament. But apocalypses were very popular literature at the time, so there are dozens of Jewish and Christian apocalypses from that time period, and if you read them, you end up with a lot of the same kinds of symbolism. So if you really want to understand Revelation, you'll need to read books like First Enoch and the Apocalypse of Abraham and 4 Ezra, and if you don't read those books, you're just simply not going to understand the Book of Revelation, because symbolism is the basic format of an apocalypse.
Yeah,
so
and in reading that, like as a kid, you read these stories and they sound larger than life, like all these things going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, keep going.
Yeah, so I mean, you have to get used to the kind of symbolism that was very common in that. So, if the main aspect of apocalyptic literature is symbolism, then the one thing you don't want to do is take Revelation very literally, because you're mixing up the medium with the message. And so, when John says, for example, if you guys persist and overcome, the struggles you're going through, and he's talking to a church, I'll make you a pillar in the temple of my God. Well, then when you get to the end of the book, he says, well, there's no temple. It's obviously very symbolic. And so you kind of have to transfer that symbolism to, hey, what's the underlying message of it? The other aspect which people are not familiar with, but which, I mean, in my field is just very, very common, pretty much any kind of evangelical commentary on Revelation or study Bible understands Revelation as a prophecy that's dealing with a very specific situation in the early church and persecution by the Roman government.
Okay.
So, the book of Revelation is basically about the worship of Jesus as Lord versus the worship of the emperor as Lord. And the areas in which it's written, emperor worship was common, more common than anywhere in the empire. And so if you miss that kind of what we call an occasion, because Revelation is also a letter, so it's really in some sense no different than Paul's letters to Corinthians or Galatians. It's dealing with very specific situations. And so, Paul wouldn't write Corinthians to the Galatians or Galatians to the Corinthians because he's dealing with very specific issues. And it's the same thing with Revelation. It's dealing with very specific historical issues. And so when we talk about Revelation as prophecy, prophecy in the Bible is usually dealing with things that are happening in that particular generation. It's not looking like way into the distant future. And that's also where people kind of get misled with Revelation, thinking that this guy is, talking about something that's going to happen 2,000 years from now, when most of the book's not dealing with that.
Yeah.
And, you can pick up pretty much any kind of evangelical commentary today and learn about that. We don't really have a lot of difference of opinion about it. But in popular culture, it's totally different. And that's partly because people read Revelation through the lens of, say, novels.
Yeah.
Like the Left Behind novels, which have done a lot of damage to understanding apocalyptic literature. So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very interesting, because I do think as a kid I read through that. I watched some of the Left Behind. I don't think I ended up reading through them, but yeah, it was kind of like this. All these different conversations around, like, how are these going to play out? What do the symbols really mean? And it was more like trying to pin them to certain things. And as I've gotten older, it's like that's a continual thing that you see. Like it's every generation has a new symbolism of what they think this means and where it connects to.
Yeah, and people come away, if they don't know the background, they come away with kind of a fearful view of Revelation. And I've taught the book many times over the years, and I've lectured at churches on it. And a lot of times students will come up and say, wow, that's really different from how I thought it was, and I'm not afraid of the book anymore.
Yeah.
And just a few weeks ago, I was approached by Logos Bible Software, which is in Bellingham, which sells this Bible software to pastors and people all over the world. And they asked me to write the online commentary for the Book of Revelation. So I signed the contract, and I'm starting to work on that now.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. And it's a bit daunting. It's supposed to be like 200,000 words over 2 years, and and they're not going to ask somebody to write a commentary on Revelation that holds some kind of minority or fringe view.
Right.
So they know the field.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So then, the other question I had for you is, when you were, you said when you went to Biola, like you graduated on top of your class. What do you think for you changed in going to that versus your elementary, high school years and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of matured and matured, intellectually, matured in my faith, matured in my understanding of responsibilities to people and to myself. And so I was very driven. I mean, the thing that really saved me educationally was that I always loved to read.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid, I would just read anything. I was very inquisitive, and I would read, even in high school when I'm supposed to be, studying for classes, I would read like virtually any book on World War II.
Okay.
I could tell you like the Japanese destroyers at Battle of Midway. I knew all these details, and so that helped me really with my English, and my understanding of how the language works and in writing. And so I've always been, very inquisitive about, virtually any topic. I wanted to be an archaeologist when I was a kid, because I read about the Tutankhamun and
Mm-hmm.
Howard Carter and these famous stories. And so that really, I think, helped prepare me. It was a good foundation for later becoming serious about education and trying to excel in what I was doing.
Yeah.
So
well, and I think in that, I interviewed your son Tobin, and we were talking about that too. Of just he was saying how he learned very differently growing up, and just that he couldn't follow ABC, like he had to do it his own way to learn things. And he's one of the smartest people I know, and extremely gifted, especially in what he's doing with the computer programming and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of those, like, I do think that, for me, I was better in the education system, quote unquote, like being able to memorize and then kick out the answer. But, like, from a reading perspective, I was really weak in that. And I think, my wife was probably more reverse of me in that she's a really strong reader. And I think as you get older, that is a much stronger base to have as you're moving forward. Because if you can pick up a book and start reading and figuring it out on your own, there's millions of books out there. You can learn anything you want just through reading. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the difference between the American education system as far as doing a doctorate is concerned and the English system. In the English system, you're pretty much on your own. You don't go over there and plug your umbilical cord into anybody. And so you have to be a self-starter, If you do a PhD here, you're set, you're told, okay, you take this class, you study this, and then turn this in. And over there, it was like, oh, you got to figure it out yourself. So, and that was a growing experience as well for me.
Yeah.
So
did you have any kids when you were starting your doctorate program, your PhD?
Yeah, we had our oldest, Derek. He was 1 year old.
Okay.
And then we had the second son, Colin, in England. So that was kind of nice because it's free. And you just go to the hospital and have a child, and they come visit you for 2 weeks afterwards at your house, and they give you a child benefit and everything. So
nice.
It's very different from our system. And then the rest of them, 3 boys, were born here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very cool. So then, upon getting back, what did you do? Well, I guess first, once you were getting close to finishing up there, what kind of prompted you, instead of staying over there, to come back to the States?
Well, we weren't allowed to work there, so I couldn't have gotten a job there. And I was, planning on teaching in an American university somewhere. So we came back to Camano Island because my wife's parents lived here. They had retired from Kodiak Island, Alaska.
Okay.
There was a little cabin next to them we could stay in for free. And we thought we might be here for about 3 months. That was 1988. We're still here. And I applied for teaching jobs. I wrote articles in journals in my field. I got my dissertation got published in 1994 on Revelation. But for some reason, I never actually got a teaching job. And I was working in Marysville for a furniture store, making like $7.50 an hour with 3 or 4 kids now, and doing various odd jobs. And at some point, I'd kind of just given up. After about 5 years, I gave up on the idea of teaching. And about 9 or 10 years after we got back, I came home from work one day, and my wife says, "Hey, somebody from SBU called, and they want you to teach a class." I said, "What?" It was the academic dean there who had developed melanoma, and he needed someone to teach a couple of classes on Paul. He couldn't find anybody, and he found an old resume of mine from Fuller Theological Seminary, and so I ended up teaching classes for him. And it was actually 3 days later, the same week, that I got offered this job, that another college called and said, "Hey, we need someone to teach in our degree completion program." And that was Puget Sound Christian College in Everett. And then after about a year, I was teaching at 3 Christian colleges. I was driving probably 700 miles a week because one of them was in Issaquah.
Wow.
Trinity Lutheran College.
Okay.
And I was, I was like the Apostle Paul of adjunct teaching. And eventually I stayed as an adjunct at SBU for about 19 years.
Wow.
And then 17 years at Trinity Lutheran. Eventually got on full-time at Trinity Lutheran, which had moved to Everett.
Okay.
And then 2 years later, the whole college closed down. So,
oh, no.
So I had to kind of rethink what I was going to do after that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So then what was that, once you started getting into the academic world and teaching and stuff, what was that like for you? Did everything kind of come naturally? Did you really enjoy as you were getting more and more into it?
Yeah, it took a while because, I'd been out of it for, almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And so I had to really bone up and go back to my books and prepare lesson plans and, learn how to lecture and how to motivate students and different types of students. A lot of students that maybe didn't want to be in the class because it was a required class. And so, how do you motivate them? How do you make things interesting? How do you make the Bible relevant to people who maybe have never even read it?
Right.
And so that was a good process for me, and it's it's something that I still work on as far as trying to motivate, trying to make things new and interesting, and getting people to think about what things mean in the Bible and how to apply it, and so on. So yeah, after Trinity closed, it was probably about 5 years ago. That's when I started the business that you mentioned earlier, Elderserve. So when I wasn't teaching in the summers, I would work construction. So I worked with a contractor building houses in the area here. So, I learned how to use tools and to work with wood and fix things. And so when the college closed, I thought, well, I need something else to do here. So I started that part-time business, Elderserve, to help seniors and widows in the area here. And it's just part-time. And so I've been doing that for about 5 years. Plus, I also got on with Northwest University in Kirkland and with Fuller Theological Seminary teaching online classes.
Okay.
So I've been doing that for about 4 years.
Okay.
And usually do 2 or 3 classes a year.
Nice.
For those institutions, and that's been fun, interesting, very different from classroom teaching.
Yeah.
So
yeah, how is that? How have you been able to transfer that? Because that is the well, especially right now, we're going through the pandemic and everything. Like the online classroom has been the main classroom for everyone now, and that's been, I feel like, the biggest challenge for both students and teachers of like keeping people motivated, keeping them focused. How was that for you? How was that transition?
yeah, I mean, the main transition was learning the system, what we call the LMS, the Learning Management System, because each college uses different types of online systems. And so Fuller uses Canvas, and it's pretty intuitive. So once you've done a class or two, it's fairly easy. And Northwest's very different. Northwest is they use their own proprietary system, and they develop all their classes. So I mean, I don't choose the textbooks. I don't make up the exams. I actually don't do anything except grade.
Okay.
Okay. And has very little feedback or discussion with the students. Which,
Okay.
I kind of miss that.
Right.
With Fuller, it's different. I design everything. I choose the textbooks. I make up the course. And I require students to participate with me and discuss with me. There's an engagement grade. And because it's a seminary, you tend to get older students. Students are already in ministry or pastors, and they're much more engaged, usually, than my students at Northwest.
Right.
So we were typically younger, and they're in the class because they have to take it as a requirement.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
But, occasionally get some engaged students there as well.
Nice.
So.
Very cool. So you're currently still teaching then with those two. You've got Elderserve, and then you've got the logos. So you're staying pretty busy and everything with everything going on then.
Yeah, and I'd been also doing music at Camano Chapel,
right.
my church, for 18 years. I was, in charge of the band basically, and just ended doing that, at least as a paid position, last November.
Okay.
So, but I still help out a couple times a month, working with the band or playing with the band. So.
Yep.
And I teach an adult Sunday school at the chapel as well. And we've been going through the whole Bible, starting in Genesis, and we're in Paul's letters right now in 1 Timothy. So an adult Sunday school class. So that's nice because that's a place where I can, engage with people one-on-one and actually have people in my classroom.
Yeah.
So it kind of fills that void that online teaching doesn't provide.
Right.
So
you said you're going through some of Paul's letters. So you've already done the Old Testament then?
Yeah, we went through the whole Old Testament. Went through the Gospels, started with Paul's letters after the Gospels, and Acts. And we're almost finished with Paul's letters. So.
Okay.
And then we're going to head into the last third of the New Testament, and then end with the book of Revelation. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So then, when did you start teaching that class then?
Well, yeah, it was probably, I mean, I've taught at the church a number of times over the years, various classes. But this particular course, through the Bible, I think we started 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay.
In Genesis 1, and kind of, it's mostly an overview.
Yeah.
Kind of going through by different types of literature.
Okay.
So, the Pentateuch, Torah, legal material, wisdom literature, prophets, and then Gospels and Acts as a history, and then you have letters. And so kind of looking at the different types of literature, genres, and what does it take to understand that type of literature.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and that's something that I always find interesting when I'm listening to sermons or things like that is, my background isn't obviously like as a theologist or anything like that. So and even like historically, I'm not strong on history. So, when I hear sermons or teachings on, different sections of the Bible, and then they take a step back from the Bible text and say, well, this is what was the context was. This is what was going on in the world. This is what the church was going through at that time. It always, to me, is always more fascinating because it also brings in the real world, because that's what we all live in the real world. And I think if you grow up in the church, you can get this feel like there's a mythological world called the Bible that used to exist, and then now we live in this world. And so when you step back and you realize, no, these are the real problems that people like you and me were having, it makes it a lot more tangible and real.
Yeah, that's a big focus. I mean, I always try to start out with looking at the context, the historical context, and I've always, been interested in history. Even, in my early years reading, I would often read history books. I never read novels. I was very fascinated by history, and so looking at the context of the Old Testament or the New Testament. I mean, we often tell our students, look, the Bible was. None of the Bible was written to us, but it was written for us. Mm-hmm. So, God speaks to people in different time periods, trying to speak into their culture and context. And and you really have to take that into account, or you're going to misinterpret things.
Yeah.
And so, I always try to work from the idea of, first, what did it mean to the original readers or hearers? And then what does it still mean for us today? Yeah. And so those, can often be a little bit different from each other. So yeah, history has always been really important to me growing up, and still love history. Matter of fact, I always hated math, which is a bit ironic because two of my sons are CPAs. But, I actually got through high school without ever having to take geometry or algebra.
Wow, okay.
I don't know how I did it and how they passed me, but, so math's not my big, strong suit. But history is a lot more interesting to me.
Yeah.
So
nice. And then I know that through COVID and stuff that you started doing the recording stuff of the adult Sunday school. Did you have that prior to COVID starting? As far as like recordings or anything like that?
We did. There are some YouTube videos of my adult Sunday school class. I think they start with like 1 Corinthians.
Okay.
And then Romans. And then when COVID hit, we were in Romans chapter 9.
Okay.
And so I stopped doing Romans and haven't finished it yet. And anyway, in March of last year, or April of last year, really, when COVID hit, the church asked me to do an online Bible study.
Okay. So
I did the Gospel of John, which I'd never done, and I always have very detailed handouts for my classes, 2 pages. And so that was available and streamed online, and they're all available on YouTube now.
Okay.
So yeah, we spent pretty much most of the last year going through the Gospel of John.
Okay.
And I'm actually looking to have some of that material published now. So that's available. And then in the fall, I started 1 Timothy, what we call the pastoral epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus.
Okay.
So.
Very cool.
Yeah, so all those classes are available on YouTube or on the chapel website.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most over the last 3 months?
Yeah, that was a hard one. I mean, I always want to talk about food.
Yeah,
but,
me too.
yeah. It's a bit mundane, but, working with tools, I have this DeWalt drill, and my battery started to not charge a couple of weeks ago. So I thought, well, I'll go online and order new batteries because I hate to buy new stuff. I like to recycle. But what I found out was it was cheaper to buy a new drill, cordless drill, with batteries than it was to buy the battery for my old drill. So I bought a new DeWalt drill for $100. Came with 2 batteries, and so that's kind of been nice to be able to use that purchase.
Nice. All right. Pretend you have a friend coming from out of town. What would the first day look like here?
Yeah. We actually would probably take them here to the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
Grab a drink and a nice pastry here. If we had enough time, we would probably take them out to Deception Pass.
Yeah.
And just show them that area, the beautiful bridge and pass there, and And then anytime I'm near Anacortes, my boys all know this, we're required to go to the donut house in Anacortes, which has some of the greatest donuts. So if you ever go there, you have to get the raspberry cream cheese bow tie,
Okay.
which they sell out of real quickly. Yeah, that's probably be it.
Nice. Very cool. Who is an interesting or fascinating person in this community that I should interview next?
Yeah, there's a guy named Dean Hirsch. He was the president or director of World Vision in Europe
Okay.
for many years, and he goes to the chapel now. He actually comes to my Sunday school. He's a very fascinating character. Now he's working with fundraising for like Safe Harbor Clinic in town.
Yeah.
And he just has a lot of interesting stories to tell about working with people in Europe, like working with the leaders of the UN, or working with Bono and stuff like that.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would encourage you to reach out to him.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
All right. And lastly, if you could have a message on a billboard right on Camano Island as you're driving up the hill, what would that say?
Yeah, I thought a little bit about this. You and I, having come from a different culture or a different country, me coming into the United States, I've been thinking a little bit about just the politics of this and all the debates people have about immigration, and I'm going through 1 Timothy and some of the requirements for like the leaders in the church. Is that they be a lover of foreigners or a lover of strangers. And it's a word in Greek called philoxenia. So philos is love, and xenos is the word for foreigner or stranger. And the opposite word is xenophobia,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So fear of strangers. And so, Paul, in several of his letters, talks about how it's important to be a lover of strangers. And this comes actually from the Old Testament. And so the verse that I would want to have on the billboard would come from Leviticus 19, which people are probably familiar with. The statement in Leviticus 19 is love your neighbor as yourself. But just a few verses after that, you have another verse that says love the immigrant as yourself. It's exactly the same in the Hebrew, except immigrant and neighbor are switched, right?
Wow.
And then right after that, in the next sentence, it says treat them as you would a citizen. And this is, of course, because of what Israel went through in the Exodus and how they were treated in Egypt as slaves.
Yeah.
And if you think about the early life of Jesus, having to flee with his family from danger in his own country to Egypt, and having been given asylum in Egypt, how important that was. If he hadn't been given asylum, we wouldn't even be talking about Christianity or Jesus anymore. So that's something I think I would want people to think about.
Yeah.
As they think about the issue of immigration. So.
Yeah, that's very cool. I didn't know about that part in the Leviticus. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Okay. Yeah, it's a pleasure. It was fun.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Jan Fekkes for joining me on the podcast, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/EP96. That's CamanoCommons.com/EP96. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.